December 7th, 1941. Pearl Harbor, territory of Hawaii. Commander Mitsuo Fuchida circled above the burning American fleet, surveying the devastation below. Black smoke rose from 8 battleships. Arizona's forward magazine had exploded with catastrophic force, killing 1,100 men instantly. Oklahoma had capsized, trapping hundreds inside her hull. California and West Virginia were settling into the harbor mud. Tora, Tora, Tora. The code word transmitted to the Japanese fleet confirmed complete surprise. 353 aircraft from 6 carriers had achieved what most military experts considered impossible. They had crippled the United States Pacific Fleet in a single morning strike. Flying cover above the attack force, Lieutenant Saburo Sakai watched American fighters struggle to get airborne. His Mitsubishi A6M Zero made short work of the few defenders. The American pilots seemed confused, poorly trained, flying obsolete aircraft that stood no chance against Japanese superiority. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Sakai would later write, "We felt invincible that morning. Our Zeros dominated the sky completely. American fighters were slow, clumsy, and fell easily to our guns. We believed no nation could match Japanese naval aviation." The Mitsubishi A6M Zero represented Japan's pinnacle of fighter design in 1941. Weighing only 6,025 pounds fully loaded, it could outmaneuver any fighter in the world. Maximum speed reached 351 miles per hour. Range exceeded 1,600 miles with external tanks, allowing operations far from carriers. Most importantly, the Zero could turn inside any Allied fighter. In a dogfight, turning ability meant survival. The tighter your turn radius, the faster you could position guns on target. Japanese pilots trained extensively in aerobatic combat, perfecting the art of the turning fight. But the Zero's dominance came at a terrible cost. To achieve its remarkable performance, Mitsubishi designers had eliminated everything deemed unnecessary. No armor plating protected the pilot. No self-sealing fuel tanks prevented fires. The two 20mm cannons carried only 60 rounds each. The two 7.7mm machine guns were barely adequate for damaging enemy aircraft. Chief designer Jiro Horikoshi had created an aircraft that prioritized performance over survivability. His design philosophy assumed that superior maneuverability would prevent the Zero from being hit. If you never got shot, you didn't need armor. This assumption would prove catastrophically wrong. April 18th, 1942. Tokyo, Empire of Japan. Air raid sirens wailed across the capital as 16 B-25 bombers from USS Hornet dropped their payloads on industrial targets. The Doolittle raid achieved minimal physical damage but delivered a profound psychological shock. American bombers had struck the sacred homeland. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, architect of the Pearl Harbor attack, understood the implications immediately. Japan needed to extend its defensive perimeter, eliminate American carriers, and force a negotiated peace before American industrial might could be fully mobilized. The result was the Battle of Midway, where 4 Japanese fleet carriers went to the bottom, along with their irreplaceable air groups. The balance of naval power in the Pacific shifted permanently, but something else was happening in the skies over Guadalcanal and the Solomon Islands. American pilots were learning to fight the Zero. They discovered that while the Japanese fighter could outturn anything, it couldn't outdive or outclimb the heavier American aircraft. The Grumman F6F Wildcat, though inferior in many aspects, could survive damage that would destroy a Zero. Lieutenant Commander John Thack developed a defensive tactic called the Thach Weave. 2 Wildcats flying parallel courses would turn toward each other when attacked. Any Zero following one Wildcat would fly directly into the guns of the other. The tactic negated the Zero's turning advantage through teamwork. American pilots also discovered the Zero's vulnerability to fire. A single incendiary bullet hitting the unprotected fuel tanks would ignite aviation fuel instantly. Zeros burned with horrifying speed, giving pilots no time to escape. The lessons learned in blood over the Solomons would shape the aircraft that would ultimately destroy Japanese naval aviation. Bethpage, Long Island, New York. Grumman Aircraft Engineering Corporation. Chief Engineer William Schwendler studied combat reports from the Pacific with growing concern. The Wildcat was giving American pilots a fighting chance, but just barely. Navy pilots needed a fighter that could dominate the Zero, not merely survive against it. Grumman's design team received specifications from the Bureau of Aeronautics in June 1942. The Navy wanted a carrier-based fighter with speed exceeding 350 miles per hour, ceiling above 35,000 feet, and range sufficient for extended combat air patrol. More importantly, the specifications emphasized pilot protection and aircraft survivability. The new fighter needed armor plating, self-sealing fuel tanks, and sufficient firepower to destroy enemy aircraft quickly. Schwendler's team worked with remarkable speed. By July, preliminary designs were complete. By August, mock-ups were under review. In September, the prototype contract was approved. The F6F made its first flight on June 26, 1942. Test pilot Robert Hall pushed the prototype through increasingly aggressive maneuvers. The new fighter handled beautifully despite weighing 12,598 pounds, more than twice the Zero's weight. The Pratt & Whitney R2800 double Wasp engine produced 2,000 horsepower, giving the Hellcat a top speed of 380 miles per hour at 23,000 feet. Rate of climb exceeded 3,000 feet per minute. Service ceiling reached 37,300 feet, but performance numbers alone didn't tell the full story. The Hellcat incorporated every lesson learned from 2 years of Pacific combat. 212 pounds of armor plating protected the pilot, oil cooler, and oil tank. The windscreen consisted of 1.5-inch bulletproof glass, capable of stopping 20mm cannon rounds. Self-sealing fuel tanks prevented the catastrophic fires that turned Zeros into flying crematoriums. The armament was devastating. 6 Browning M, 250 caliber machine guns, each firing 850 rounds per minute. Total ammunition load was 2,400 rounds. The guns were harmonized to converge at 300 yards, creating a concentrated kill zone where brief bursts could shred any aircraft. Grumman test pilots put the Hellcat through punishing trials. They intentionally damaged aircraft to test survivability. They flew with simulated combat damage to verify the fighter could return to carriers even when severely shot up. Lieutenant Commander Butch O'Hare, America's first ace of the war, flew evaluation flights and provided detailed feedback. His recommendations refined gun harmonization, cockpit layout, and control feel. Production began in October 1942. Grumman's Bethpage facility transformed into a precision manufacturing operation, producing 5 Hellcats daily by early 1943. That number would eventually reach 600 aircraft per month at peak production. The production rate reflected American industrial philosophy. Design a proven aircraft, then manufacture it in overwhelming numbers without constant modifications. While Germany and Japan continuously modified their fighters seeking marginal improvements, America focused on mass production of standardized designs. February 1943. Naval Air Station Oceana, Virginia. Lieutenant Junior Grade Hamilton McWhorter III climbed into a factory-fresh F6F Hellcat for his first familiarization flight. The cockpit felt spacious compared to the cramped Wildcat he'd flown previously. Engine start was smooth, the massive R2800 rumbling to life with authority. Taxi characteristics were conventional, visibility over the nose adequate despite the large engine. Takeoff roll was shorter than expected. The powerful engine and relatively low wing loading meant the Hellcat broke ground quickly. McWhorter raised the landing gear and felt the fighter accelerate smoothly. At 10,000 feet, he began exploring the aircraft's capabilities. The Hellcat felt solid, responsive without being twitchy. Roll rate was excellent for such a large fighter. The controls remained effective even at low speeds. He pushed the throttle forward and watched the airspeed indicator climb. 300 miles per hour. 320. 350. The Hellcat kept accelerating smoothly past 380 miles per hour. Most importantly, the Hellcat felt like it could take punishment and keep flying. The substantial structure and redundant systems gave pilots confidence. This was an aircraft built to survive combat, not just win it. Training squadrons began receiving Hellcats in early 1943. Pilots transitioning from Wildcats were impressed by the performance improvement. Those who had faced Zeros in combat were even more enthusiastic. The training regimen for Hellcat pilots emphasized deflection shooting, energy management, and mutual support tactics. Unlike Japanese training that stressed individual aerobatic skill, American doctrine focused on teamwork and systematic tactics. Pilots learned the boom and zoom technique. Maintain altitude advantage. Dive on the enemy at high speed. Fire a short burst. Extend away using superior speed, before the enemy can react. Climb back to altitude and repeat. This tactic exploited the Hellcat's strengths while avoiding the Zero's turning advantage. American pilots who tried to turn fight Zeros often died. Those who used speed and altitude lived to fight again. Gunnery training consumed hundreds of hours. Pilots practiced deflection shooting against towed targets until accurate fire became instinctive. The Hellcat's gun harmonization created a kill zone where all 6 machine gun streams intersected. At 300 yards convergence distance, a 2-second burst delivered 170 rounds into a 6-foot diameter circle. Against unarmored Japanese aircraft, such concentrated firepower was absolutely devastating. August 31st, 1943. Marcus Island, Central Pacific. The Hellcat entered combat when Air Group 15 from USS Essex struck Japanese installations on Marcus Island. Lieutenant Commander James Flatley led 36 Hellcats in fighter sweeps designed to test new aircraft against Japanese opposition. The performance exceeded expectations. Hellcats destroyed 17 Japanese aircraft without loss. Pilots reported the fighter handled beautifully in combat, absorbed battle damage that would have destroyed Wildcats, and delivered enough firepower to destroy targets quickly. Ensign Armistead Smith shot down 3 Zeros in his first combat mission. His after-action report stated, "The Hellcat does everything better than the Wildcat, except possibly low-speed handling. Against the Zero, it's clearly superior. I never felt in danger once I understood the aircraft's capabilities." Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The combat debut validated Grumman's design philosophy completely. News spread quickly through Pacific Fleet squadrons. Pilots clamored for the new fighter. Carrier air groups began transitioning from Wildcats to Hellcats throughout late 1943. Japanese intelligence analyzed captured Hellcat wreckage and pilot reports. Their assessment concluded the F6F represented a significant threat that required tactical adaptation. But Japanese training capacity had already begun collapsing under attrition's weight. November 1943. Rabaul, New Britain. The massive Japanese base at Rabaul hosted over 300 aircraft, making it the most heavily defended target in the South Pacific. American strategy called for neutralizing Rabaul through sustained carrier strikes. On November 11th, aircraft from USS Saratoga, Princeton, and Essex struck Rabaul with 200 aircraft, including 75 Hellcats. The Japanese scrambled every available fighter to defend the base. The resulting air battle became known as Bloody Tuesday. American pilots claimed 70 Japanese aircraft destroyed against 9 losses. Hellcat pilots accounted for 48 kills, demonstrating overwhelming superiority. Lieutenant Commander Edward O'Hare, leading fighters from Enterprise, shot down 5 aircraft in a single engagement. His division of 4 Hellcats destroyed 15 Japanese fighters in 20 minutes of combat. The pattern was clear. Properly trained pilots flying Hellcats could achieve kill ratios exceeding 5-1 against Japanese opposition. Japanese pilot quality had begun declining precipitously. Pre-war veterans with 700 hours training were being replaced by pilots with fewer than 200 hours. Navigation training was minimal, instrument flying almost non-existent, gunnery practice inadequate. American pilot training had become an industrial process, producing highly skilled aviators in large numbers. Training bases in Florida, Texas, and California graduated thousands of naval aviators annually. Each received minimum 600 hours flight training before carrier qualification. The training disparity created cumulative advantages. Experienced, American pilots survived to pass their knowledge to new pilots. Japanese veterans died faster than they could train replacements, creating a downward spiral in pilot quality. January 1944. USS Intrepid, Pacific Fleet. Commander William Dean briefed his fighter squadron on upcoming operations against Truk, Japan's most important Central Pacific base. Intelligence estimated 200 Japanese aircraft defended the anchorage. Dean's pilots flew F6F Hellcats with full confidence in their aircraft. Combat experience had refined tactics and doctrine. American pilots knew exactly how to fight Japanese aircraft and win consistently. The strike on Truk on February 17th and 18th demonstrated American air power at its peak. Carrier aircraft destroyed over 200 Japanese planes, sank numerous ships, and effectively neutralized Truk as an operational base. Hellcat pilots claimed 156 air-to-air victories. Dean personally accounted for 11 aircraft over 2 days, becoming an instant ace multiple times over. The technology gap continued widening. Radar-equipped night fighter Hellcats began operations in early 1944. The F6F Newtons and F6F Newtons variants carried AN/APS-4 or AN/APS-6 radar in a pod on the starboard wing. These aircraft could intercept Japanese bombers in complete darkness, achieving kills the enemy never saw coming. Lieutenant Commander William Henry led night fighter operations from USS Enterprise. His squadron developed tactics for radar intercepts, working with fighter direction officers to vector onto targets. On a single night patrol, Henry destroyed 4 Japanese bombers, attempting to attack the fleet. The enemy never knew what hit them, their aircraft simply exploding in darkness as Henry's radar-guided fire found them. June 19th, 1944. The Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. The battle that would become legendary began when radar detected massive Japanese airstrikes incoming from Admiral Ozawa's carrier force. 346 Japanese aircraft launched in 4 waves intended to destroy American carriers. 475 Hellcats rose to meet them in history's most lopsided aerial battle. By sunset, 300 Japanese aircraft had been destroyed against 29 American losses. Individual Hellcat pilots achieved remarkable scores. Lieutenant Alexander Vratsiu destroyed 6 dive bombers in 8 minutes. Commander David McCampbell shot down 7 aircraft. Ensign Wilbur Webb became an ace in his first combat mission with 6 kills. The kill ratio exceeded 15-1. Japanese pilot Saburo Sakai, now an instructor, watched the battle from Iwo Jima. He later wrote, June 19th, 1944 was the death of Japanese naval aviation. Our carefully rebuilt air groups were destroyed in a single day. The Americans had turned the sky into a slaughterhouse. The Turkey Shoot validated everything the Hellcat had been designed to accomplish. Superior speed allowed American pilots to control engagement geometry. Superior firepower destroyed targets quickly. Superior protection allowed damaged Hellcats to return home when equivalent hits would have destroyed Zeros. The systematic advantages were insurmountable. Radar-directed fighter direction meant American pilots always achieved favorable positioning. Japanese formations flew blind into prepared ambushes. Centralized control maximized defensive efficiency while minimizing losses. The Hellcats' robust construction allowed pilots to take risks that would be suicidal in fragile Japanese aircraft. American pilots could press attacks knowing their aircraft would absorb battle damage and keep flying. October 24, 1944, Battle of Leyte Gulf, Philippine Islands. Commander David McCampbell led a division of 7 Hellcats on combat air patrol over the American invasion fleet when radar detected a massive incoming raid. 60 Japanese aircraft approached from the north. McCampbell's tiny force intercepted the raid over 90 minutes of continuous combat. He personally shot down 9 aircraft, bringing his single mission total to 9 kills. His wingman, Lieutenant Roy Rushing, destroyed 6 more. 7 Hellcats destroyed 24 Japanese aircraft, disrupting the raid and saving American ships from attack. McCampbell's ammunition counter showed he'd fired only 600 rounds, averaging less than 70 rounds per kill. The action earned McCampbell the Medal of Honor. His combat report demonstrated the tactical principles that made the Hellcat so effective. Maintain altitude advantage. Use speed to control engagement. Fire accurate short bursts. Extend away before the enemy can respond. Japanese defenders at Leyte could muster only 108 carrier aircraft from 6 carriers. Most were shot down without achieving significant results. The carriers themselves were sacrificed as decoys, empty shells of their former power. After Leyte Gulf, Japanese carriers never again launched offensive operations. Naval aviation had been effectively destroyed as an offensive force. The carefully rebuilt air groups, 2 years in training, had been eliminated through sustained attrition they could not replace. The statistics told the story of absolute dominance. From 1943 through 1945, F6F Hellcats destroyed 5,156 enemy aircraft in air-to-air combat. This represented over 56% of all American naval aviation aerial victories during World War II. The kill ratio was approximately 19-1. For every Hellcat lost in air combat, American pilots destroyed 19 enemy aircraft. Grumman produced 12,275 F6F Hellcats in just over 2 years. Peak production reached 600 aircraft per month. Each aircraft required 20,000 man-hours to construct, yet assembly lines achieved remarkable efficiency through standardization. The Hellcats' dominance reflected fundamental advantages in design, training, logistics, and doctrine. Design philosophy emphasized survivability and firepower over maneuverability. The result was an aircraft that could absorb battle damage, destroy enemies quickly, and bring pilots home. Training quality created pilots capable of exploiting the aircraft's strengths while avoiding its weaknesses. American aviators received twice the flight training of their Japanese counterparts by 1944. Logistics sustained continuous operations at unprecedented tempo. Fleet oilers delivered fuel and ammunition daily. Replacement aircraft and pilots arrived constantly. Damaged aircraft were repaired overnight by maintenance crews working around the clock. Doctrine evolved continuously based on combat experience. Tactics that worked were adopted fleet-wide. Techniques that failed were discarded. The learning cycle operated faster than Japanese forces could adapt. The human stories behind the statistics reveal the Hellcats' impact. Lieutenant Junior Grade Milton Curthers achieved 5 kills despite having his hydraulic system shot out. Unable to lower his landing gear normally, he cranked them down manually while flying with his knees, then landed successfully aboard his carrier. Ensign Robert Duncan was separated from his division and encountered 12 Japanese bombers without escort. He destroyed 4 with gunfire, then forced a 5th to crash into the ocean by flying alongside and gradually forcing it down, achieving 5 kills despite running out of ammunition. Lieutenant Commander George Duncan led a division that encountered 40 Japanese aircraft. Outnumbered 10-1, his 4 Hellcats destroyed 19 enemy planes through disciplined teamwork and superior tactics. These stories repeated thousands of times across the Pacific. Navy fighter pilots became celebrities. War bond tours brought aces home to inspire factory workers and sell securities. Their photographs appeared in Life magazine and newsreels shown in theaters nationwide. The public embraced these young men as symbols of American technological and military superiority. The Hellcat became synonymous with victory in the Pacific, but the ultimate measure was strategic impact. Japanese naval aviation never recovered from the sustained attrition inflicted primarily by Hellcat pilots. By early 1945, Japan's carriers sat pierside without aircraft or pilots. The few remaining naval aviators were transferred to kamikaze units for suicide missions. American carrier aviation dominated the Pacific completely. Task forces operated within sight of Japanese shores with impunity. Carrier aircraft struck targets throughout the home islands, destroying what strategic bombing and submarine warfare had not yet eliminated. The B-29 raids from the Marianas that devastated Japanese cities were possible because carrier aviation had swept Japanese naval power from the seas. The atomic bombs that ended the war flew from Tinian, an island captured under the protective umbrella of carrier air power. The Hellcat enabled victory through systematic technological superiority. Every aspect of the aircraft reflected lessons learned in combat. The armor that protected pilots, the self-sealing tanks that prevented fires, the massive firepower that destroyed targets quickly, the robust structure that absorbed battle damage. These features weren't revolutionary individually. Collectively, they created an aircraft optimized for destroying enemy fighters while protecting American pilots. The production numbers tell their own story. 12,000 Hellcats represented American industrial capacity overwhelming Japanese resources. The United States could replace losses faster than Japan could inflict them. More importantly, America could replace pilots. Training programs graduated 65,000 naval aviators in 1944 alone. Each received comprehensive instruction in navigation, gunnery, instrument flying, carrier operations, and tactical doctrine. Japan trained fewer than 5,000 pilots in the same period, most with minimal flight hours and inadequate preparation. The training disparity created a death spiral. Japanese aviation could not escape. Post-war analysis by both sides confirmed the Hellcat's decisive role. Admiral Raymond Spruance, commander of Fifth Fleet, stated, "The F6F Hellcat won the air war in the Pacific. It gave our pilots an aircraft superior to anything Japan could produce, combined with training that made them unbeatable." Japanese Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa, who commanded carriers at Philippine Sea, wrote, "The American Hellcat was superior to our Zero in every combat essential characteristic. Combined with their pilot training and radar direction, we had no answer." Technical evaluations revealed the full extent of American advantages. The Hellcat's Pratt & Whitney R2800 produced 2,000 horsepower using high-octane fuel. Japanese refineries could not manufacture. The Norden gun sight used gyroscopic stabilization requiring precision manufacturing beyond Japanese capabilities. The radar systems that directed Hellcats to intercepts used cavity, magnetrons, and circuitry Japan could not duplicate. The proximity-fused anti-aircraft shells that protected carriers from attack required sophisticated electronics Japanese industry could not produce. The technology gap reflected industrial capacity differences that were ultimately insurmountable. American factories produced 96,000 combat aircraft in 1944. Japan manufactured 28,000, mostly using substitute materials that degraded performance and reliability. American shipyards launched 155 major warships in 1944. Japan launched 28, while losing more vessels than they could replace. The resource disparity extended to every category: steel production, aluminum refining, electronics, manufacturing, fuel production. America outproduced Japan by factors ranging from 5 to 1 to 20 to 1. The Hellcat embodied this overwhelming material advantage in aerial form. Each aircraft represented 20,000 man-hours of labor, supported by vast supply chains producing engines, propellers, instruments, radios, weapons, and countless components. The logistics of producing 12,000 Hellcats demonstrated industrial capacity Japan could not match. But material alone didn't guarantee victory. The Hellcat succeeded because it was the right aircraft for its mission, flown by properly trained pilots, supported by superior logistics and doctrine. The combination was decisive. Japanese pilots flying Zeros might individually be brave, skilled, and determined. Systematically, they were overwhelmed by American pilots flying Hellcats with better training, better support, and better tactics. The human cost of this technological and training disparity was staggering. Over 400 Japanese pilots died on June 19, 1944 alone. Thousands more would die in the following year as American carrier aviation operated with impunity throughout Japanese-controlled waters. Many Japanese pilots were teenagers with minimal training. Sent into combat, they had no realistic chance of surviving. American pilots later expressed sympathy for opponents they described as brave but poorly trained. The strategic bombing campaign that followed carrier aviation's victories killed hundreds of thousands of Japanese civilians. The atomic bombs that ended the war killed hundreds of thousands more. Victory came at terrible cost, but the alternative would have been worse. Every month the war continued meant thousands more deaths throughout Asia and the Pacific. The Hellcats' role in achieving air superiority shortened the war by making Japan's strategic position hopeless. The 5,156 aerial victories represented more than statistics. Each was a young man whose training, courage, and aircraft prevented Japanese forces from operating effectively. The Hellcat pilots who achieved these victories were ordinary young Americans transformed by circumstances into warriors. Most were in their early 20s. Many had never been more than 100 miles from home before military service. They learned to fly fighters, land on carriers, navigate over vast oceans, and fight enemies trying to kill them. The best became aces. The average became competent professionals. The unlucky died despite their skill and training. Lieutenant Alexander Vrasiu survived being shot down over the Philippines and spent 6 weeks with Filipino guerrillas before rescue. He continued flying, testing jets after the war, and retired as a commander in 1963. Commander David McCampbell retired as captain in 1964 after commanding carriers and serving in senior positions. He received the Medal of Honor for his actions on June 19 and October 24, 1944, finishing the war with 34 aerial victories. Many Hellcat pilots transitioned to civilian aviation after the war. The same young men who had fought across the Pacific became airline captains flying passengers over routes they had once fought to secure. Their combat experience made them exceptionally capable pilots who could handle any emergency. The Hellcat itself served briefly in peacetime before being replaced by jets. The last frontline Navy Hellcats retired in 1954, replaced by F9F Panthers and other jet fighters. But the Hellcat's legacy endured in multiple forms. Its design philosophy emphasizing pilot protection, robust construction, and concentrated firepower influenced every subsequent American fighter. The training methods developed for Hellcat pilots became the foundation for jet fighter training. The tactics pioneered in F6F combat evolved into modern fighter doctrine. The logistics systems that kept Hellcats operational became models for supporting complex military aircraft. Museums worldwide preserve Hellcats, so future generations can appreciate the aircraft that dominated Pacific skies. The National Museum of Naval Aviation displays multiple examples, including aircraft flown by famous aces. The USS Yorktown Museum ship in Charleston maintains Hellcats on her flight deck as they appeared during World War II. Air shows occasionally feature flying Hellcats, allowing spectators to see and hear the powerful R-2800 engines that gave the fighter its performance. These rare appearances preserve flying history that might otherwise exist only in photographs and memory. Veterans' reunions brought Hellcat pilots together for decades after the war. They shared memories, honored fallen comrades, and ensured their experiences would not be forgotten. The last large gathering occurred in the early 2000s as the veterans reached their 80s. The documented history grows richer as archives release new material. Declassified intelligence reports reveal the extent to which American code-breaking provided strategic advantages. Combat camera footage shows actual aerial combat from gun cameras mounted in Hellcats. Oral history projects have recorded hundreds of veteran interviews preserving first-hand perspectives. These materials allow historians to understand the battle not just as statistics, but as human experience. The fear of combat, the exhilaration of victory, the grief of loss, the pride of service. The Hellcat represented America's industrial mobilization, transforming peacetime manufacturing capacity into overwhelming military production. From factory floor to flight deck took months, not years, demonstrating responsive capability Japan could never match. The 5,156 aerial victories achieved by Hellcat pilots remain unmatched by any other fighter aircraft in such a short time frame. Those victories enabled everything that followed: the liberation of the Philippines, the capture of Iwo Jima and Okinawa, the strategic bombing of Japan, the eventual atomic attacks that ended the war. Each victory represented a Japanese aircraft that would not attack American ships, bomb American troops, or kill American sailors. The cumulative effect was absolute air superiority that made Japan's defeat inevitable. The Zero that had seemed invincible in 1941 had become obsolete by 1944, not because the aircraft changed, but because American industry, training, and doctrine produced systematic advantages individual skill could not overcome. The age of the samurai aviator ended in the skies over the Philippine Sea and Leyte Gulf. It was replaced by an era where technological superiority, training excellence, and industrial capacity determined outcomes. The Hellcat embodied this transition, a machine optimized for victory through systematic advantages rather than individual prowess. Japanese pilots had expected to face improved American fighters. They never anticipated the Hellcat's combination of speed, firepower, protection, and pilot quality would create such overwhelming superiority. The 5,156 aerial victories over 2 years of combat exceeded Japan's ability to replace losses. Each destroyed aircraft represented irreplaceable resources. Each dead pilot meant lost training investment. The attrition spiral accelerated as pilot quality declined, making survivors increasingly vulnerable. By war's end, Japanese aviation had been reduced to kamikaze attacks, the final admission that conventional air combat against American forces was hopeless. Suicide missions reflected desperation born from systematic defeat. The Hellcat had done its job. It had swept Japanese aviation from Pacific skies. It had protected American carriers during their advance across the ocean. It had enabled victory through technological and systematic superiority. Grumman's sturdy fighter exceeded every expectation. Designed to win, it dominated. Built to protect pilots, it brought them home. Employed correctly, it achieved the most lopsided aerial victory in history. The F6F Hellcat remains the standard against which carrier fighters are measured. Fast enough, tough enough, powerful enough to win decisively. 5,156 aerial victories in 2 years of combat, 19-to-1 kill ratio, 56% of all naval aviation victories in World War II. These numbers tell the story of absolute air dominance, of how American ingenuity, industrial might, and the courage of young men combined to change the fate of a war. In the vast skies of the Pacific, where blue met blue and the horizon seemed endless, the Grumman F6F Hellcat became more than a machine. It became a symbol of mastery, proof that when engineering precision meets human valor, even an empire can be brought to its knees. When F6F Hellcat first took flight in 1942, the United States was still reeling from the shock of Pearl Harbor. The Japanese Zero dominated the Pacific skies, its agility and range unmatched. American pilots flying the outdated F4F Wildcat faced staggering odds. The early months of the war were defined by desperation and sacrifice, men fighting bravely in aircraft that could not quite keep pace with their adversaries. But back in Bethpage, New York, Engineers at Grumman Aircraft Engineering Corporation were already hard at work, designing a new kind of fighter, one that would correct every shortcoming the Wildcat revealed. Under the leadership of Leroy Grumman and his talented team William Schwendler, Robert Hall, and Gordon Israel, they built the Hellcat not as a theoretical marvel, but as a practical, rugged, pilot-friendly machine that could be mass-produced, easily maintained, and flown by the thousands of young Americans who would soon fill the decks of aircraft carriers across the Pacific. Unlike its predecessor, the Hellcat was designed not for the aerobatic perfection of airshow performance, but for the grim realities of naval warfare. It was built to take hits and bring its pilot home. It was built for victory, not vanity. The F6F's design reflected every lesson learned in blood. Its powerful Pratt & Whitney R2800 double wasp engine generated over 2,000 horsepower, giving it the raw thrust to outclimb and outrun the nimble but lightly built Japanese Zero. Its thick armor plating protected the pilot, its self-sealing fuel tanks reduced the risk of fiery death, and its 6.50 caliber Browning machine guns gave it a devastating punch. The Hellcat was not as light or graceful as the Zero, but it didn't have to be. It could dive faster, survive longer, and fight on its own terms. Japanese pilots who once danced around lumbering Wildcats found themselves hunted by Hellcats that absorbed damage and struck back with ferocity. In the Pacific, every new Hellcat delivered to the fleet was a promise that the days of Japanese aerial supremacy were ending. The Hellcat was a weapon, but it was also a companion. For the 19- and 20-year-olds who climbed into its cockpit, it was both armor and instrument of vengeance. They trusted it with their lives. They learned to feel its rhythm, the vibration of its great radial engine, the resistance of its control surfaces, the steady hum that became the sound of survival. Men like David McCampbell, the Navy's top ace, who shot down 34 enemy aircraft, became legends in their own time. In the Battle of the Philippine Sea, known as the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot, McCampbell and his fellow Hellcat pilots decimated the Imperial Japanese Navy's air arm. That single engagement saw over 300 Japanese aircraft destroyed, many by Hellcats, at the cost of only a handful of American planes. The statistics were staggering. By the end of the war, the F6F Hellcat would claim 5,163 aerial victories, more than any other Allied naval aircraft. Its kill ratio, an astonishing 19-1, was proof of its unmatched effectiveness. Yet the numbers tell only part of the story. Each victory represented not just a destroyed enemy aircraft, but a life saved, a carrier spared, a convoy protected, a soldier on a distant island who would live to see another day. Behind every Hellcat in the sky stood an army of American workers, men and women, who labored day and night in the factories of Grumman, Pratt and Whitney, and thousands of subcontractors scattered across the country. The speed and scale of production were nothing short of miraculous. At the height of wartime output, a completed Hellcat rolled off the assembly line every hour. The average production cost of around $35,000 per aircraft was a testament not to cheapness, but to efficiency. Grumman's engineers had designed the Hellcat for simplicity modular parts, easy access panels, and rugged construction that could withstand the rough handling of carrier life. Factory workers affectionately called themselves Grumman Iron Works, a nod to both the sturdiness of their planes and the spirit of the people who built them. Many had sons, brothers, or husbands flying those very machines. For them, the work was personal. Every rivet driven, every engine tested was a contribution to victory. The Hellcat's introduction did more than win dogfights, it reshaped strategy. Before the Hellcat, Japanese carriers could operate with near impunity. After it, the tide turned decisively. The U.S. Navy's carrier task forces became floating fortresses, projecting air power across thousands of miles. From Tarawa to the Marianas, from Leyte Gulf to Okinawa, the Hellcat's roar heralded the advance of American might. Air superiority meant freedom of movement. It meant that Marines storming beaches would not be strafed by enemy bombers. It meant that supply convoys could reach forward bases, unmolested. It meant that Japan's island strongholds could be isolated, bombed, and bypassed. The Pacific War was, at its heart, a war of distances, a struggle over oceans so vast that logistics became as important as courage. The Hellcat made those distances survivable. It escorted bombers, intercepted raids, and shielded fleets. It gave the Navy the confidence to move ever closer to Japan's home islands. Nowhere was the Hellcat's supremacy more vividly displayed than in the skies over the Philippine Sea in June 1944. The Japanese, desperate to halt the American advance toward the Marianas, launched their largest carrier force since Midway. They sent wave after wave of aircraft, some flown by inexperienced pilots rushed through training after years of attrition. What followed became legend. American radar detected the incoming formations at long range, and hundreds of Hellcats rose to meet them. The result was a slaughter so one-sided that pilots later compared it to shooting turkeys in a barrel, hence the nickname, the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. By day's end, the Hellcats had destroyed over 300 Japanese planes. Entire Japanese air groups were wiped out. The carrier Taiho, pride of the Imperial Navy, was sunk. Japan's naval air power was effectively shattered, never to recover. That victory wasn't just tactical, it was symbolic. It proved that American airmen and aircraft had achieved a level of superiority that no amount of bravery or tradition could counter. The Empire of Japan had lost the skies. While the Hellcat's design was formidable, it was American training and doctrine that made it truly lethal. The Navy and Marine Corps had learned from early defeats that courage alone could not win air battles. Pilots were now trained systematically how to use their radios effectively, how to fight in disciplined formations, how to exploit the Hellcat's advantages in dive and roll. The U.S. Navy's fighter direction tactics, coordinated through radar-equipped ships and advanced communication systems, gave pilots an unprecedented edge. The Japanese, relying on visual spotting and individual skill, found themselves ambushed again and again by well-coordinated American squadrons. Equally important was logistics. American carriers could recover, repair, and relaunch aircraft with astonishing speed. Damaged Hellcats were often patched up and flying again within hours. The Japanese, lacking such infrastructure, saw their surviving planes rust away on isolated airfields. To understand the Hellcat's place in history, one must see it through the eyes of those who flew it. Pilots spoke of the Hellcat with affection and awe. It was heavy, yes, but stable. It didn't stall suddenly or spin out like some high-performance aircraft. It forgave mistakes a priceless quality when your life depended on split-second decisions. Climbing into a Hellcat, one veteran later recalled, was like climbing into a suit of armor that could fly. You knew she'd take care of you if you took care of her. They learned to fight as teams, covering each other's tails, sharing kills, and returning to their carriers with camaraderie as strong as steel. Many owed their survival to the Hellcat's ruggedness. Pilots limped home with wings riddled with holes, control surfaces shredded, engines coughing smoke, and yet the aircraft kept flying. By VJ Day in 1945, the F6F Hellcat had earned its place among the immortals of aviation history. It had destroyed more enemy aircraft than any other Allied fighter in the Pacific. It had proven that technology, properly applied, could multiply courage 1,000-fold. But its legacy was more than numbers or victories. The Hellcat embodied a philosophy of war that America had mastered by the mid-1940s, a philosophy of integration. Machines, men, and methods working together in harmony. Production linked to tactics, engineering linked to training, logistics linked to strategy. No single element won the war alone. Together, they became unstoppable. For Japan, the rise of the Hellcat signaled the twilight of an empire. The once feared Zero, emblem of Japanese dominance, was now obsolete. Its light frame, once an asset, became a liability against the Hellcat's firepower and resilience. Japan's pilots, once the elite of the world, dwindled to raw recruits flying into battles they could not hope to win. Each air engagement became a grim arithmetic of attrition, an empire bleeding out in the skies. As the American fleets advanced closer to the Japanese homeland, the Hellcat continued its relentless work, now flying escort for bombers that leveled cities and crippled the nation's industrial base. By 1945, Japan's airfields were graveyards, its pilots ghosts of a vanished glory. When the war ended, thousands of Hellcats were mothballed, scrapped, or sold. The world moved on to jet aircraft and the nuclear age. But among the men who flew her, the Hellcat never faded. She remained the aircraft that turned fear into confidence, defeat into victory. Naval historians would later call the Hellcat the single most effective fighter of World War II. It wasn't the fastest or the most beautiful, but it was the right plane at the right time. It represented the full flowering of American wartime genius, the ability to design, build, and fight with a purpose larger than any one man or machine. And so, in those war-torn years, the wings of democracy truly did eclipse the empire of the rising sun. Across the vast Pacific Ocean, where freedom and tyranny once clashed in smoke and fire, the Hellcat's shadow marked the path to victory, proof that courage backed by competence and idealism armed with innovation can reshape the world. Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch, and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.